Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ancient Warfare Podcast. My name is Jasper. I'm the editor of Ancient Warfare magazine. With me is Murray Dom. He's the assistant editor. And we have a returning guest, Stephen DeCasien. He's been on the show, I think, about 2 years ago. I don't know, 2, 3. It was probably during COVID time, so that is kind of nebulous. But we're all very interested in blunt naval trauma, so we decided we'd get him on again and talk some more about rams, which we'll have to navigate a little bit carefully because that was a pun unintended.
So many naval puns.
Yes. We'll have to be a little bit careful because, this is obviously an audio only show, and describing rams might be hard to do. But maybe I should sort of introduce what we sort of know about ramming up to all the discoveries near Agadir. I think I'm not wrong in saying that in the early 1980s, the Athlete ram was discovered, which is about 600 kilos, I think. It's a bronze monster of a thing. And we had a handful of other ones, much, much smaller, in various museums, 2 in Germany, I think, and 1 in Greece, and really not very much evidence of the physical ram. Of course, we have descriptions, we have depictions on all kinds of sculpture, and in various other other ways of looking at the things. But we had very few examples, and the Athlete ram was thought to be belong to a fairly small ship, I think, of 3 or 4. And the most important piece probably for determining how big these ships and rams is the Actium Monument, which is the big monument that overlooks the Bay of Actium, where obviously Octavian, later Augustus, won his big battle in 31 BC. And there's a temple complex, and at the base of the temple complex is a sort of a long horizontal podium with insets for rams. I mean, so the actual rams are gone, and they're thought to be rams that were captured from the fleet of Mark Antony and Cleopatra. And they're sort of in ascending or descending order, depending on whether you go from left to right or right to left. And we can sort of try and plug in the rams and see what goes where and match that to descriptions of what the fleets look like. And I think that's where we are. And then there was Agadir, and now we suddenly have about 10 times as many rams as we had before. And I think you're the first to really sort of systematically look at them and try to say something about ramming and rams in general. Is that right, Stephen?
Collectively, all the information together, yes. I mean, there's been, a few people that have looked at rams, obviously, Dr. William Murray, right? The Age of Titans, talking about Hellenistic navies. Was it Torn? The old book Torn wrote on navies. But to just specifically look at naval rams, just naval rams, how the development of them, the casting of them, their imagery through over almost 1,000 years. That's what my dissertation, that's what my research is based on. So solely just the weapon itself is my focus. So I guess we can say that I'm zoned in on it. Just specifically on the weapon itself, I'm honed in on it. Yeah.
Well, it's quite lucky then that the discoveries at Agadir coincide. Otherwise, you'd be running a PhD about the Athlete ram.
But it's, you're also in a kind of a unique position. You're one of the few people who can say that you can actually suddenly work with a lot of new evidence. I mean, how often do you get to do that in ancient history? I mean, certainly archaeologists certainly get more evidence in general, but so much of it
and so groundbreaking
condition.
I think one of the things you're saying is that these new rams, as they are discovered and analyzed and weighed and measured, change the picture of what boats they were on, and suddenly what was a big ram is now a monster ram and atypical. I believe now they think that the ram on a relatively large ship is actually surprisingly small because it doesn't need to be big and heavy. It can be a piercing. Well, that's you, not me. You should be saying that.
what are the Agadi rams? What do we find? Where do they go on? Can you give us sort of an idea?
I could give you my interpretation from what I've seen. From what we have at Egedy, we have the historical account, right? We've all read Polybius, and we know what he tells us. He tells us that before the battle, 200 new quinqueremes are built, right? Pentarace. These are fives. He tells us straight out that is what they built. That's the only type of ship built for the Egedy battle. Now, based on the evidence that we have from the Egedy Islands, most of them seem to come from the same class.
Just real quick, back up the ship. We're talking about the very end of the the first Punic War, so 241 BC. So just give that people a context. Yes, off Sicily, Rome, Carthage.
So off the coast of Western Sicily.
This is big naval battle time. Yeah.
Yes, this is one of the largest naval battles in the First Punic War, which sees a lot of naval battles. So Rome and Carthage are going at it for years, creating multiple navies, mixed fleet navies that have triremes and quinqueremes. But in this final battle in 241 between Rome and Carthage, Polybius, the Roman historian, tells us that the Romans strictly build fives, quinqueremes, pentarace for this specific battle against the Carthaginians. And what happens is, or what we see in the archaeological evidence, is that the rams that were initially found tended to be the same size. They looked smaller compared to the Athlete ram and the Actium monument. If you follow, William Murray's classification system, you would think that they are triremes or smaller. And he made that argument that they were triremes. But, as the years pass by, their weights change. Some of the whale pockets are where the ram encases the whale timbers of the ship. And that is the giveaway of kind of how big the ship would be. Some of them are widely more spaced, and trying to figure out exactly how big the ship is difficult to determine. But we've found rams that are a little bit larger than our average size. So maybe we're looking at, if Murray says they're triremes, maybe this is a quinquereme, right? Or maybe this is a 4. But recently we found a smaller ram than our average size would say. So now we're looking at a mixed fleet, and we have to remember these are also Roman and Carthaginian rams, and we might have some old Roman rams that were taken in a previous battle by the Carthaginians and reused. So it's hard to determine which rams are coming from which fleet, but we do have a collection of rams now that have an average. How many do you have now? We do have 27 rams. 27 rams, which is in the archaeological record. If you go, once my dissertation is published, I have a list of, the rams that have been discovered, and there's 39 ram or ram-like artifacts that are in the Mediterranean, and 27 come from the Egedy site, which is just astonishing, right? Yeah. In context, right? In context on the seafloor, with other things found in context like swords, amphoras, helmets, coins, right? Scattered on this huge battle.
Is there any wood left? Any timbers?
Yes, there are some timbers found inside these rams. They are the Soprintendenza del Mare in Sicily, who oversees the project, along with RPM Nautical Foundation and the Society for the Documentation of Submerged Sites. They all work together on this project to conserve the wood, conserve the rams, et cetera, et cetera. But they're working on the timber part of that. Mm-hmm. And the timbers they tell a completely different story, right? Mm-hmm. About the construction of these ships. The complex nature of the ship construction. It's obviously pegged moors and tenon joinery, which is the standard of shipbuilding during this period. And most ram-bearing warships are built with pegged moors and tenon joinery. I mean, the wood survives in these ships for 2,000 plus years. One of the main reasons is that these rams probably, once the ship was struck, the ram probably either fell off or the ship was taken apart by the waves and then went to the seafloor, and then after a few years, probably, octopi actually make their homes in these rams, like, junk and rots and stuff. So it actually helps preserve the wood inside because they blocked other material from coming in the back.
So you're saying that probably the ships themselves did not sink. Well, I think we knew this, but the galleys didn't sink. They were just either broken up at the surface of the sea, and or the rams just broke off. And
it's difficult to say because if we look at the copper spikes that we find in the back of the rams in the bottom plate and the cowl, which are the top and the bottom, that's where they connect to the front of the prow of the warship, they're almost found completely intact. Even with rams that have battle damage, they're found still intact. So that would indicate to me, at least, that they didn't strike and then rip off. The ship was struck and then fell apart, probably, and then it went down, or pieces went down, and the ram went down in the drink. It's hard to determine how
rams
fast
with
rams
battle
go
damage
down.
too. Huh.
Yeah, yes, a lot of rams.
We'll have to talk about that later.
Yeah. So if we want to step back to the classification for a second, I think that we should, if we look at Polybius and what he says, he's really spot on with his narrative for most part. And I think that the new landmark Polybius is coming out soon. If you guys didn't know, but the new landmark Polybius is coming out. I think William Murray has a section in that where he does reevaluate the classification that he did before, and we discussed it previously. And it might be that Polybius is right, that these are quinqueremes, but also there's a possibility that this is a mixed fleet, right? We might have a 6, whether that's a Roman 6 or Carthaginian 6. There is a 6 here. And we might have a few triremes, right? And this is indicated by the ram size, because now we have the average class, whatever that class may be based on your argument, but then we do have bigger rams and smaller rams, or bigger ram, small ram. So we do have that. And they come from this battlefield, for sure, in this cluster. This tells us something completely, if we believe Polybius in either 5s, this tells us about a reevaluation of the Actian monument and so forth, because now we have to think about if these are 5s and the size of 5s. Are 5s different when we talk about Hellenistic 5s, when we talk about Eastern warships, right? If these are 5s, we have to reevaluate the size of the athlete ram, because that might be a bigger ram now. And if we reevaluate the size of the athlete ram, that means the sockets on the Actian monument are probably not just from a 5 to a 10, but only the largest in Mark Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, probably 7, 8s, 9s, and 10s, with the smaller sockets. I'm saying smaller sockets, they're huge. These smaller sockets, being 7s of a smaller variety, right? It's so difficult to tell with rams now that we have more, because there's, local varieties, and, each ram is uniquely cast. So each ram tells you a completely different story and is unique to each warship. So it's, the more we find, the more difficult it is to fit all this information together and make, assumptions or interpretations about it.
Can you give us some indication? We just said the athlete ram is 600 kilos. Was that 1,300 pounds? Somewhere in that range. How big is the average ram you found at Egedy?
Egedy, I think it's like almost 200. I think at this point it's like 200 kilograms. But I would say like 150 to 200 kilograms. So about half, maybe like 1/3 or half of the athlete ram. Yeah. The athlete ram is massive. The athlete ram, I think, in terms of where we go like American feet, is like 6 foot, like standing on its tailpiece up. It's pretty tall, or 7 feet tall, which is that's a massive ram. It's made for that style of warfare though. If we think about the style of warfare in comparing ram, the athlete ram is in the the 200s to 204. I think it was dated 204 to 164, and it's made for this naval siege, frontal ramming, Eastern Hellenistic style warfare, which the Romans never participate in with the Carthaginians. They never besiege coastal cities. They do participate in frontal ramming, which again, we'll talk about the damage to these rams later, but they don't participate in this style of siege naval warfare where they're breaking through harbor traps and stuff like that. So the ram designs, even though they're 3-bladed, right, meaning they have those 3 fins to penetrate the hull.
Yeah, you see those on sculpture all the time as well. Yeah.
But if you look closely at the designs are actually different.
So is there presumably because they're all unique to each ship, there's a range of longer, heavier, higher rams, even on a ship that would be nearly the same design. So you possibly therefore have rams that are suboptimal. They're trying a heavier ram, like, and sticking it on a boat that isn't suited to that kind of ram.
Yes.
It's such a fascinating, and again, the complications of Egedy, though, that allows that kind of speculation. If you've got this range of rams that all come from the same ship, that's fascinating. Do the actual rams match? Just talked about the three fins. Do they actually match the sculptural and pottery depiction?
I mean, there's a range of in the depictions, depending on what you're talking about, where some are more realistic than others. So it's like when we get to, let's say, coins of Augustus that depict rams, I would say that, if they're looking at the roster or things like that, typically they look like real three-bladed waterline rams. The Corona Rostrata that has Marcus Agrippa on it, right? It's a small ram. It has just three blades. It doesn't really look that realistic. Coins of Demetrius that have prows of warships, those I could say look very accurate to archaeologically tested rams. But then we have rams, there's coins that are minted by Mark Antony in the East, and they're just, they look like three little prongs that are hanging down from a ship. There's a wide variety of what you get, and that goes into, are people who are making these depictions actual naval personnel? Do they know what naval rams look like? Have they been exposed to naval rams? It's a whole nother thing that we can get into. But a lot of depictions of rams are pretty good, but then again, it's like since the archaeological record of rams, because we only have like these 39s and 27 come from a very specific period. When we look at coins in different depictions or different coins, if we look at rams in different depictions, are we looking at legitimate depictions of a different type of three-bladed waterline ram or a different variety of three-bladed waterline ram, right? Can they have a heavier or thicker middle blade? There's a very interesting coin by, I think it's the Crassus. It's a Crassus coin, and it's got a very good looking. It's only a three-bladed waterline ram on the back of the coin on the reverse, but it has a very odd thick middle blade. But you see these on Roman coins in a very specific period. So are they trying a new variety, or is this just an interpretation of what they think a ram looks like, right?
It is. This sort of reminds me of what we look into in the magazine more often run into is a classification of Roman helmets where you have, for the imperial period, you have 12 subtypes of imperial Gallic, and it's based on, well, I won't say 14 helmets, but, in many cases, the subtype is, is like a very small number of helmets. And it's like, this is just slightly different compared to that. And you go, is this just, the individual blacksmith just doing it slightly differently, or is this an actual design difference? And I assume this is similar to the questions that you have. Is this because they made a change because the prow, this particular ship was built slightly differently and they needed to adapt the ram to make sure it fit? Or is it actually like a design decision? We're going to build this ram differently because we have a slightly different purpose in mind.
And then the same issue of, and then you've got Trajan's column or Marcus Aurelius's column, and what's shown is not what we understand from the archaeological record. And you're like, so we've got, the typical shield on Trajan's column is not the size of a typical shield. Not that we have a typical shield. That's probably the biggest frustration. But I think the comparatives of that when you have an archaeological records where the artifacts do match the depiction, that throws a whole curveball into the field, because then you're like, if that correlates to other fields where we don't have as much archaeology, that sort of throws a big spin on it, which is fascinating in itself. All right, should we talk about battle damage?
Just to quickly, first, of the 27, are they all Roman, all Carthaginian? Can you tell who made them? For
the most part, a majority are Roman rams. And that is already a problem, right? Because the Romans won the battle. We know that because they also won the First Punic War, and Polybius tells us that they won the battle. So that's how we know that some of them are likely reused captured rams from the Battle of Drepana, which happened a few years earlier than the Battle of the Egadi Islands in 241. But we can tell that some Egadi rams are Roman in manufacture. We don't know if they're necessarily Roman in use during the battle, but Roman in manufacture because they have Roman inscriptions on the cow nosing, which is the top of the ram, and they have, so and so, son of so and so, I approve this ram. And they also have some Roman motifs like a Montefeltro helmet or a winged victory. And some other people, I think it's Jonathan Pragg, works on the dating of the rams or tries to date them, give them building periods based on the epigraphic evidence or the inscription evidence found on the cows. There are some Punic inscriptions that are on these cows on the tops of the rams, but it's hard to tell. I would say that most of them are post-casted inscriptions where the ram has been cast and then the inscription has been carved into the top, whereas the Romans, a majority of them are pre-cast made inscriptions where they were built in the beeswax model and then cast in bronze, and they're not incised into the ram itself or added later. They're not like fusion weld to the cow. So we know for sure that they're Roman manufactured. The Punic ones, I don't think, some of them at least, we can be definitive and say 100% these are Punic in manufacture, but we can say that they're Punic maybe in use by then.
Has analysis been made of the bronze of each of the rams to be able to say what the chemical makeup is?
Some of the bronze has been analyzed. I think like maybe the first 6 have like a full makeup done, where it's like, some have more bronze, like 80 or 90%, more bronze, more copper, and then tin, lead, and trace elements of zinc. Some rams have high percent of lead, which that might tell you something about, if it's a Carthaginian ram, more lead,
Yeah, hard to know.
It could lean towards that, being like they're rushing to cast something, and lead might make it more malleable, more easier to cast. I've talked to different people about that subject, but knowing the physical makeup of the ram, it's helpful. But there's just such a wide variety because it doesn't seem like they're all cast from at the same time or at the same place necessarily.
Yeah.
And then they bang together, and then what happens?
When they bang together, I couldn't imagine what the sound sounded like, but it must be horrifying. But these, of the 27 rams that we have now, the initial ones found at the Egadi Islands in the early 2000s, they found were just completely sheared down the center. So a ram, if you look at a ram, has 3 blades on one side, 3 blades on the other side, the cow leading up the center, and the bottom plate leading down the bottom. And 2 of them were just sheared straight down the center and only left either the port side blades or the starboard side blades. So that right there indicates, either heavy ramming or ram-to-ram strikes, right? Hitting another ship directly in its front. We do have Roman rams, that have some of their fins bent in different directions, bent upwards, completely ripped off from the core of the ram, which is just the center piece of bronze. Just the ram's completely torn away. Some rams did have wood between their fins, meaning that it struck a ship, sunk, and took part of the enemy ship with it. And there's wood between the fins still of the enemy ship, which that's just wild. Imagine finding a sword, right? Still in an enemy soldier, right? It's like you're finding a ram still in an enemy ship. And then some of the rams have different variety of pieces that have just been blown off. Like it must have struck, and the casting in those parts either had bubbles or fissures under the surface that you can't see based on an eye inspection. And once it struck, the vibrations and the force went through it and just popped off either part of the cow or the bottom plate, or all of a sudden the interior just blew open. We have some rams, one of the bigger rams at least, that I like, has its whale pockets in the back just completely shot outwards. It looks like it hit something, and then it's where the boat would meet, the whale timbers would meet the pocket, just blew open backwards.
It was pushed back onto the ship so hard that
it blew open. Yes, correct. Yeah, pushed so hard backwards.
Wow. The suggestion of combat that it, with the timbers stuck in them and the damage to them just is remarkably visceral, because you don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that if you were, probably not very easy to. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. If you're a physicist, you can probably calculate the forces involved and maybe the speeds that would have been required to get a ship to develop such force I mean, you'd have to calculate what the weight of the entire ship is and the momentum, but well, we have Olympias. We can.
I don't know if they're going to be willing to allow that to happen. You almost need to
but you know how we have an idea how much Olympias would weigh and how much. I think it weighs about 40 tons with crew and everything.
Yeah.
It's one of the.
What does actually affect the reconstruction of Olympias? Does the ram of Olympias have to be redesigned?
Yeah, the ram of Olympias, I don't think was. I mean, it was never accurate to start with because it was based off the Athlete ram. So if they were building a trireme, they started off with a ram that was never really a trireme ram. And I think they knew that and they kind of made it smaller. But even then, you can look at the ram on the Olympias and it's the Athlete ram spitting image. So yeah, it would probably be better if they either used one from Egedy as a reconstruction, even though it's a Roman, it might be not a trireme, but the one in the Piraeus Museum, which is just the port side of a ram because it's been halved due to battle damage, might be a better look for the Olympians.
It's one of the few topics that my brother is a metallurgical engineer, and you know, I'm the ancient historian opera singer. So we don't have many conversations where we can meet. But his main topic today is the effect of metal fatigue and what happens to metal under stress and pressure. Obviously, mostly to do with buildings and bridges, but talking to him about with some of the battle damage on weapons, I think he can suddenly starts talking and spouting all this stuff about the material makeup of metals. And one of my favorites is, you know, the common term today is copper alloy, not the word bronze. And my brother got on a high horse, which is nice to see, which is that if it's got zinc in it, it's brass. If it has any other metal except zinc, it's bronze. So us saying copper alloy, we're essentially saying bronze. But it's like, okay, so if it's got tin, yes, it's bronze. If it's got other metals, magnesium, whatever, it's bronze. So it's like, it's bronze. So, you know, we're not going to start calling it the copper alloy age, which seems to be the trend. But that, I think what you were saying before about the different chemical makeups of these rams where the metallurgy has been analyzed could absolutely be experimenting with, you know, the effects of battle damage that they've observed and going, right, well, we don't want that to happen. Let's try this, you know, making it more malleable with more lead, for instance. So, I mean, all that.
That requires that somebody would have recorded the kind of and be aware of what it might be if you put different metals in it and how much of everything. I mean, do we have any indication that they knew that might make a difference?
I'm not too sure about that. I mean, the rams themselves, some of the Egedy rams do have markings in the back, which some have argued that their relation to the amount of beeswax weight to bronze that is needed. So there is some kind of you know, a discussion amongst the casters and the creators of the model that this model weighs so much. Once you take it off, this is how much bronze is needed. That's the only evidence from the rams directly that we have where we can actually see the markings left in the casting from the maker, basically. And there's tons of other making marks on these rams from the model makers, but that's the only thing we can get from the ram in terms of, like, you know, did they think about the bronze or how much bronze was used? But we do have some later fixes to the rams that don't match the initial bronze used. It looks like there was a later weld, or maybe not a weld, maybe just like a pour of bronze into one of the upper fin surfaces. So like the top of the ram near the cowl of one of these rams, there must have been a hole in the casting. So they must have filled the interior of the ram with some kind of refractory clay, and then poured molten bronze into the section, and then let it sit.
The idea of running repairs on a ram is, you know, we talk about beaching ships.
Was this a repair or just sort of a factory?
It must have been a factory repair. It must have been done before the ram was put on the ship, because the interior, you had to get into the interior to do this. There's no way to remove the ram from the bow to make this repair. It had to be done, you know, after it was cast. It must have been an after cast repair, and then it was put on, because there's other holes that haven't been repaired that if they were battle damaged, they would have been repaired. So,
is there any evidence of battle damage repair on any of these rams?
Yes, there is actually. So there's I think it's AW1, one of the earlier rams found, has a crack in its cowl that looks like it would have had like a patch of bronze held onto it with some lead, because of like these two like little insets where they've carved out and put it on there, thinking that that would probably hold it in place,
Wow.
which it obviously didn't. But there's probably some of these breaks and fissures that were likely fixed, after the battle was done. But some of them, or most of them, were likely done after the casting, trying to fix casting deficiencies. Especially if we go by, the narrative of the First Punic War, when they're in a rush to build these ships, and so with the Carthaginians. So it's like we're not casting them to the highest standard. Like the athlete ram is an amazing cast, whereas they're beautiful rams. Don't get me wrong, but you look closely at them, very closely. There's there are tons of little holes here and there. The surfaces are uneven. The fins are not necessarily even throughout. Things of that nature.
So they're in a hurry, and it's a lot of trouble to melt down all this bronze and make into a new ram and make a new mold, and
make a new model.
Wax, so you have to make that everything again. It does make you wonder what that approval inscription means. It's like, the model looks nice. Go ahead.
Yeah. Presumably lots of locations, which is why again you can have a different mix of metal, and then they're all rushed to a location where the ships are being constructed.
I mean, they must have been casted near the shipyard, I assume, because when I did the casting of my ram, right, I built a full scale ram based on reconstruction of amalgamation of rams. I found that, when you build this beeswax model for the ram, it's very rigid and it can sit for a long time. But, you shouldn't let it sit too long, because the gravity of it will start pulling it apart, and it will misshape from the bow. And then, right, you want these rams to be fit tightly onto the bow, right? You don't want no give, because then it will rip, like, we talked about that one ram ripping apart. Mm-hmm. You want them to fit tightly, so when the ram strikes another ship, the ramming forces will not only hit the ram, but will distribute through the whale timbers, through the stem, through the bottom plate, into the keel and the rest. So you have an efficient ramming vessel. So I think that they're probably casted somewhere nearby, but we haven't found, archaeologists haven't found casting pits for rams. Maybe because they're done on the beach, and once they're done, they clear them up. Who knows, right?
I don't know. Do we know of any wharfs where we know that triremes or any galleys were built?
Well, there's Carthage. Presumably they were building shipyards there.
Well, we have the shipyard, the ship sheds in various places, but those are tight designs. The galley fits in there exactly, which is maybe not the spot where you want to build the thing, because you need a lot of people running around them. And
but based on the ram that I built, you need to know. Obviously, you're building the beeswax model on the bow of the ship. You have to, right? Because of this, the nature of which the direct lost wax casting system works. So the ship needs to be built.
Yeah, the ship is ready. You got the prow, all the timbers are in place, and then you put the model on.
Yep. So you build the entire. You can build, when you build ships in antiquity, during most of antiquity, you build them pegged, mortise tenon shell first. Meaning you lay the keel, you build the outside shell first. You can build everything up and to the prow. You don't have to finish the entire ship, but then you do have to pitch the bow, right? You have to put pitch or pine resin on the bow to watertight the timbers, but also create a working surface for the beeswax. Because I found out that raw beeswax or heated beeswax will stick to wood and not come off.
Oh, yeah, it gets into the porous wood,
Yeah, exactly. So, but pitch works perfectly, because pitch is just, good enough to where beeswax sticks to it, but releases when you pull it hard enough. But it doesn't necessarily stick to the beeswax where you can't take it off. So you have to build the ship, pitch the bow, and then once you have that finished bow with the pitch on it, the pitch also helps to create a little bit of a few centimeters of more surface. Right, because when you cast something, it's always going to shrink, and I guess Murray can ask his brother what is about the shrinking process of bronzes, because every bronze you create shrinks. It doesn't matter, and it's ridiculous.
Well, that's where the formula comes in, because presumably through experience they would know we would lose 4%.
Yep.
size based on the chemical makeup of what we're putting in, which is, again, just the fascinating science of it and the exacting nature of that.
They must have known that in this process. So they pitched the bow, and then you create this beeswax model. But you must have been, or the beeswax model makers must have been working closely with the shipbuilders, because you have spikes in most of these archaeologically attested bow timbers that we find in rams, but the spikes don't cross in the rams themselves. If you don't want to cross spikes in rams or prows, because you'll break the wooden timbers inside. But you can't see the spikes anymore once you pitch the bow. So you have to be talking to the guys to be like, okay, where did you set the spikes? In the wooden bow. Okay, now you pitched it.
Oh,
okay,
so the spikes that you use to put all the timbers
put the wood together.
Yeah.
So it's like you put the timbers together, the prow, you've spiked it, so now it's stuck. Now the wood cannot come apart. You've pitched it. Now they're hidden, right? And now you create a beeswax model, and you have to create the holes for the spikes that will be later placed into the warship while it's in the beeswax model, right? Because it's really difficult, and we don't see any post-cast holes, indicators that they're drilled later. They don't do that. They create the holes pre-cast. The only ram that has a post-cast hole is the Polonica ram, and it looks like someone tried to drill an extra hole and crack the bottom plate. So, there's some kind of more conversation going on between the shipbuilder and the model maker and the caster. This is a very highly intricate process, and each ram tells you a little bit more about this process, because in each ram, right, the casting, once you've made the beeswax model, they've taken it off, they've casted it, direct lost wax casting, right? One ram, or one model, one ram. Some of these rams are more finished than others. They've been cleaned, they've been scraped down. Some rams have not been scraped down, meaning they're not finished. So you see like wax comb marks, driblets, right? Like we see in other archaeologically attested statuettes and stuff like that. But some of these rams are really given a raw deal. I mean, they just, looks like someone's like, okay, my job's done for today. Take it off and cast it. And the entire bottom of the ram is just unfinished. It's just have lines and lines and lines.
It's underwater. Nobody's going to see it.
It's underwater.
Yeah, that might also, no one will see it. But that might also suggest, as you say, the rush to complete them in time for the battle. Oh, amazing.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think that does point to that, is that some of these things are definitely rushed into production. And they're like, once you heal the seams with the wax, okay, we don't have to finish the entire surface. And, like Jasper said, oh, it's going to be underwater. Just slap it on them, put it out there.
These 27 rams, same place, same time, mostly. Do you said they had inscriptions. Are they the inscriptions by the same people? So that they were probably produced same site or at least the same time?
So I think that based on what I read and also what Prague says, I think there's two varieties at this point, or three varieties actually at this point. Two main inscriptions, Latin inscriptions, where we can kind of guess around the year that this person was the quaestor or quaestor, right? The person in charge of doling out the public funds. So there's one set with the guy's name, I think it's Marcus Plubicus, forget right this moment. I don't have it in front of me. Forget the exact name. And then there's another one. Oh, I wish I could remember. Now I can't remember. And then there's another set of inscriptions. So two Latin inscriptions, one with one guy and son of whatever, and then another one. So it seems to be two definitive building periods for those, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they were built in the same time or at the same time, right? It could have been he was quaestor for this many years or this amount of time, and they were casted between those times. And then Egedy 1 is unique because Egedy 1 has an inscription that is not like the other ones. It looks like it's a Roman inscription, and it says, a board of 6 men approved this ram, which is interesting because we don't really have evidence necessarily for naval boards. We kind of, that's...
Triumviri.
Yeah,
that's 3, not 6.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, that's what I'm saying. It's like we do have boards, but
Triumviri, sorry. The Triumviri Navalis, yeah.
So it's like 6 men. We do have stuff later, like Augustan period evidence. But remember, this is 241. And that ram, if it's Board of 6 Men, that seems pretty early in the First Punic War, whereas the rams with the defined Latin inscriptions seemed like they're probably more Egedy, and this Egedy 1 ram might be an earlier, maybe a captured one that's been an old cast where they were, they still had money, and maybe this is a Board of 6 Men from some locality. And I don't know. It's a question that people have worked through that are better at Latin and definitely better at interpreting inscriptions than I am.
I think I've read a long time ago article about how long ships might last in service.
Mm-hmm.
Do these, because that these rams were used made for a specific ship. Presumably,
Mm-hmm.
if a ram has been in service for 20 years, then the ship has been in service for 20 years.
Yeah.
You can't date them well enough, I guess.
I mean, you could take a guess and say like maybe this ram's been around for 10 years max. Maybe. I mean, that's so difficult. I wouldn't want to put my name on that one. It's really difficult to say. I mean, ships can last a long time if you keep on putting pieces in, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is with rams, right? It's like it's a bronze piece. If it gets damaged, you can only fix the exterior. If you remove it, putting it back
the ship
on
itself, you get a situation like with the USS Constitution where it's been in service for 200 years, but there's very few timbers that were in there when it was built. Yeah. Sooner or later, everything gets replaced. So these 27 we can date and cite very specifically. Mm-hmm. You said there were about 39. Do we know the other 12? Can we be specific about when they date to and obviously where they're from even? So
we have the athlete ram, right? Hellenistic. There's was it 200s, 146, around there. That's probably Ptolemaic.
Far Eastern Mediterranean.
Oh yeah. So it's we know it's a Ptolemaic ram based on the decorations that are on it. We do have a fragment of a ram that was found at the excavations of the Actium monument. So there is a small bronze fragment of probably a ram. I would say it's part of probably one of the rams that was found. It was found in the ground in front of the sockets. Mm-hmm. So it's a fairly large piece. It only weighs like 6 kilograms, but it looks like, based on, I've looked at 3D models of reconstructions of the sockets and rams from the sockets. It looks like a bottom section of one of these rams. And you kind of get like, if you look at the Egedy rams and some of the other rams, and you see like the scraping marks, the wax working marks, you can kind of get an idea that like, oh, this side's the inside of the ram, this side's the outside of the ram. If you want to believe that this is a fragment of a ram, which I'm pretty sure that the Actium fragment is a fragment of a Hellenistic ram that fought in that battle. So we do have that, and that was found at the monument site. We have the Apologoni ram, which was found in northeast Sicily. The date on that is it's disputed. It's like somewhere between 250 to 50 BCE. That's an odd ram. It's got very thick blades, but also in the interior they found bow timbers. But between the ram and the bow timbers, they found extra sheathing of metal, which I don't know if that was to make up space.
Reused or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument it could be it was reused. Maybe the ram was cast too big and they tried to fill it with space. Maybe it was to stop corrosion from the wood, right? This or that. It's got these odd little things that are going on with it. One of the spikes doesn't match the rest. Was this spike a poured spike, or they poured molten bronze into the wood? I don't know if I believe that, but it does have these odds and ends that doesn't make sense. We have. Not a 3-bladed waterline ram, but we have a proembolian, which is a subsidiary ram that sits higher up on the bow or higher up on the stem of a warship that is used to basically either stop your warship from going fully into the other warship or helping you hit the rowers at a higher level. But proembolian is just a smaller ram basically on a warship. We do have one of those from Belgamo. I think that's northern Libya is where they found that, and that's the only for sure 3-bladed proembolia or proembolian Proemboli is plural, Proembolian that we have. So it's of a three-blade design, but it's a Proembolian, which is really cool. And it's got the similar design of a waterline, three-bladed waterline ram, but has a like a hook and a nice curvature to it, so we know that it's a Proembolian. The Florica ram in Pisa, which I think is one of the most unique ones because it doesn't look like any of the other ones. Typically, when we see rams in the archaeological record, they have the three blades that are more or less even. Then they have like this rib on the fin. Florica ram has no ribs. It's very uneven throughout. It's very bad casting, and it's almost the head of the ram is almost completely split off from the body, meaning it must have struck something, and then just the casting around the headpiece was just bad and just ejected from the front. But the fins tell you a story because the fins are uneven, so there's probably a difference in fin creation for these rams, and sculpting them straight to the bow of the model, or creating them in a mold and then attaching them to the core of the beeswax model, and that kind of tells you that. But we do have a bunch of other rams, Piraeus, Canopolis ram. There's like an unpublished Proembolian in Germany, Bremerhaven ram in Germany. I don't know if I'm missing anything. Oh, there's that Mithridatic ram that they found in the Black Sea, and I guess it is Russia, right? It's like it kind of looks like the rams, if we can say rams loosely, on Trajan's column, right? Those ships with the curve. The curved bow that they might have some people say, oh, those are rams. It kind of actually looks like that. I don't know if I consider that a ram, maybe like a bronze encasing. So we do have a nice variety, but mostly three-bladed waterline rams, and obviously mostly from Egedy, and then mostly these rams are found either in Greece or obviously Athens, found in Israel. So I think I hit them all almost.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
The footnotes to a podcast. Beautiful. You said that your thesis is planning on being published once you finish and complete.
I mean, it will be published through Texas A&M University once I'm done. And it's on ramming development, the production of rams, mostly based on my experimental archaeology project, where I went through the process of casting a ram. And then what is it? Naval rams, popular cultures, right? Imagery, iconography, things like that. And then just discussing what we know, what we can get out of Polybius and the Battle of the Egedy Islands, better reconstructing classes and stuff like that.
And is there a plan to publish it more widely after that, or not yet?
I mean, not yet. I'm currently working with RPM and the rest of the people at the Egedy site, especially Dr. William Murray, to create a website where these rams will be housed and all the information will be put up and published there.
Nice.
Okay. So hopefully that will come out once all this stuff is done. So yeah, that's been in the works for a while. So I'm excited to see that come through with everybody in the project involved.
Time has flown. We'll probably have to have you back on and talk about more ram stuff.
Yeah, that sounds interesting to me.
Yeah.
And
thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.